I want to make sure I always try to start these presentations with just a little bit of background, just to understand my perspective, so that you maybe can take it with a grain of salt when I say things, that you understand the seat on the bus that I sit in, and more importantly, the kind of glasses I've been equipped with throughout my career. And I'm not saying anything I say is right or perfect or even a genuine. It's more of a shared experience. And the other thing I'd say is our supply chain partners at Millcraft are absolutely phenomenal and they're world class. And I think I talked about in our May session about this idea of Ubuntu. I am because we are. And that truly is the situation here, is that, I lean on a lot of our suppliers to, share information and really communicate back and forth. And this is as much their presentation as it is Millcraft's. We've been doing these presentations going back to 2017 when we first saw, things on the horizon coming up. And, kind of these state of the industries are not too dissimilar. We all, if you lived in the East Coast or were part of, anything to do on the East Coast this past weekend, about Hurricane Henri and, the tracking. And it's kind of ironic. The timing of all this is the fact that, I think the state of the industries are not too dissimilar to people and their willingness to watch the Weather Channel and watch this guy specifically, Jim Cantore, talk about hurricanes, right? It's never a good thing. The statement is it's never a good thing when you see Jim Cantore come to town, right? So if I think back this just past year, we were talking in January when we had our state of the industry for the first one of this year on January the 9th, I believe it was. And we talked to maybe 180 people, and you're trying to lay out, hey, we're just seeing, if you lay out the math equation, it would say we're looking at an allocated market beginning towards the end of summer. And these are the things we see. And so I know a lot of people took that with a grain of salt, and they looked out on the horizon and said, everything looks bright and sunny. I don't see what you see, right? Fast forward in May, we started talking about, hey, we did this again. This time we had about 380 participants, I think it was. And, the seas are, starting to pick up and the skies are getting darker. And people are starting to see and starting to experience, some of the issues that we were describing back in January. And the analogy I'll use right now is we are all in the eye of the hurricane. If you've not been impacted by the supply chain challenges that we're going to talk about, then consider yourself very blessed and very lucky, because the reality is the industry globally, not just in the United States and North America, are constrained right now. And it's not just our industry, as we'll talk, right? So a lot of the questions you may be having that I know a lot of you have shared is, why can't I get the stuff I need? Why can't, you're killing our ability to produce print, why is freight so expensive? Why are my deliveries out of whack? What is an allocated market? Who's left in the industry for me to source from? The big one is I want to describe again how 2021 is going to be different than 2018, because there are so many of you who have the mindset of this will be just like 2018's correction from the 2017 tightness, and that you're expecting 22 to just rebound. And I'll explain why my perspective would say something very different than that, right? Because here's the reality. Back in January, this is a whattheythink.com survey of printers that talked about in the next 12 months, what's your biggest challenge? The reality is that most printers didn't see supply chain challenges on the horizon. It was only 14% of folks were concerned that some of their biggest challenges may be in consumables and supply prices, right? In fact, it's just prices, really. It's not availability. And so again, it's one of those things that's out of sight, out of people's mind. People really weren't talking about this in January. So a little bit, when we started doing these state of the industry this year, we were talking about seeing this situation happen. There were a lot of people that didn't give it credibility. And right now, I think as of this morning, there were 486 attendees scheduled to be a part of this. And there's a tremendous number of folks I know are waiting to watch this come out on YouTube. So it just goes to show, my opinion, that everybody's feeling it now. Everyone's watching the Weather Channel. They want to see the situation. They want to see the hurricane come on shore. So let me see if these market descriptors describe, maybe your present situation. You may think, hey, I'm running, our operation is running hand to mouth. We're only getting 40% of what we order, what we would like to get. It's in stock one day and it's completely gone the next. There's no sign of when it's going to be back in stock. I can't get a really good order, can't get a really good information from my supply chain partners. And I don't trust the inventory levels I even see on e-commerce sites. I see inventory, but then they say I can't buy it, right? Do all these descriptors maybe fit a little bit of what you're feeling? The reality is, I just described every one of the statements from a Wall Street Journal article talking about the grocery store problems, right? So our challenges are not unique. Our challenges are, unfortunately, a shared experience with almost everything globally. If you go into, a grocery store and you're looking for, toilet paper again, it's problematic. This was a picture taken of a local Walmart store, of their grocery shelves in terms of their fresh produce. I was just at my hotel this morning, coming down to get breakfast, and the lady was apologizing because they didn't have any milk. They were waiting on the truck and they've been out of milk for 2 days. So it's all around us. And this picture that you see of all these trucks, for those of you that are in Louisville, Kentucky, you know exactly what this is. This is the Kentucky Motor Speedway, and those are all the Ford F-150s that are setting out in the lot waiting on a semiconductor so that they can go to market. So it's a clunky global supply chain pandemic, if you will. And then you've got these people like this guy, right? That when they see it, they hoard, right? And quite honestly, this is the thing that concerns a lot of our supply chain partners on the supplier side the most, because they don't have good visibility to who is hoarding stock and who is not. And the story I would tell you is in 2018, it's no secret that, there were some printers, major printing companies, had over 100 rail cars of stock piled away. And all that did was precipitate a downfall, right? So the impact is, it's not just our industry. I'm a fairly large guy. And so when I hate going back to school shopping with my daughter, I was just in Kohl's over the weekend. Literally, I went in and we're looking for back to school apparel, and Kohl's is trying to make it look like they are full. But the reality is, in a normal August, when I go back to school shopping, my shoulders are hitting, rack to rack, because they're jamming everything in. They're clearing out their summer clearance. They're bringing in their fall line. There's back to school everything. There were 15 feet between the racks because they were spaced out to make it look like it was full. It's not just us, folks. It is absolutely not just us. And so I know that's hard to take for some folks, and I'll explain in maybe a little more detail some of the things that are unique to the graphic paper industry. So we're going to talk about, COVID, because you can't talk about anything these days in business without talking about COVID. We're going to talk about unemployment. We're going to talk about inflation. We're going to talk about some of the challenges, both from a freight, supply demand balance, lack of imports. Are all these things killing print? What is the future of print? I know that every one of you that love the print industry as much as we do, you worry, are we killing the long-term viability of print, right? And I'll talk about some of the things that you may need to consider. And then I want to truly give you a recipe or a forecast for success, to maybe help you survive better than the other person. Because I will tell you, going forward, it's a battle of supply chains. It's not a battle of individual companies. It's who are you and who are you aligned with, more importantly, that will determine who has success and who doesn't. Okay? So let's talk about the elephant in the room, what everyone wants to know. I think that the recovery in 2022 is going to look just like 2018. It's going to be a house of cards, and prices are going to fall, and mills are going to cave. And, that's my perception. Here's the difference. I think you got to understand what were the drivers in 2018. So in 2018, you had a dramatic run up in pulp, purchase pulp escalation. So not every producer back in 2018 was fully integrated, meaning they can take, trees from the forest, basically take in, 8 foot or 32-foot logs from the forest and turn it into their own pulp so that they can make paper from it. There's still, to this day, even a variety of folks that need purchased pulp to run the facility. They're not fully integrated, right? In 2018, there were a lot more in that condition. You had chemical costs that were running. There were a lot of challenges in chemical costs. The domestic freight market was probably just as bad then as it is today. And really what you saw were high cost capacity closures. This is when you saw the Westlands, the Appleton Coateds, the Flambeau Rivers. Those were the ones that went out. We talked about the profitability stack. These were fourth quartile assets that were going out. And it was easy to call the shot of, this is what the cost chain looks like. We believe these are the mills that are quote unquote at risk, right? In 2021, it's a little different, right? So you had a variety of COVID impacts. You had COVID obviously took out demand, and then suppliers needed to take out supply to try to come into some balance, right? And then you had the COVID impact on employment. And so I just want you to consider for a moment, think about where you were as a company, say maybe of May of last year. We were all wondering, how are we going to survive? The PPP funding still wasn't rolling through just yet. And there were a lot of people that had to basically cast the die and say, what does their future look like? And so what you saw were a lot of people had to make decisions to shutter capacity and shutter big time, long-term capacity elements. And so really what I would tell you is that COVID probably accelerated about a decade's worth of change into less than 10 months, right? It took a decade's worth of change and brought it down and said, no, it's going to be, you're going to feel it over the course of 10 months. And then you had, COVID not only affected us, it affected everyone across the globe. So you had dramatic global capacity closures. So you hear, Domtar, Ashdown taking stuff offline. You hear Kingsport, migrating to another product line. You had Verso taking down Luke, then Wisconsin Rapids. You had Stora Enso taking out the Oulu mill in Finland. These are big time moves from first quartile assets, okay? Because the reality is, in the graphics printing, in the graphics paper space, the returns aren't there compared to the best case alternatives that other producers have by saying, I'm going to take this asset, I can make paper-based anything. They're choosing to make graphic papers today. Some are choosing to vote with their wallets and invest in packaging grades or invest in fluff pulp because capital flows to where it gets treated the best. And that's the reality that we all have to come to understanding of. The mill suppliers have got to make money. They've got to make a reasonable return on the capital dollars. Paper making is extremely capital intensive. Okay. They have a tremendous amount of fixed costs that they've got to cover. And so it's just a different time, right? You had chemical cost increases due to a variety of issues, all started, kind of with the pandemic, but then also with the West Texas freeze. And we talked about those in May. Domestic freight, it's even worse now. The COVID did not do any good to domestic freight either. And we'll talk about that here in a couple slides. And then maritime freight is quite candidly, it's a disaster, and so, a lot of these items, I view them as actors on a stage. And so a lot of times people would say, well, what's the impact of this on my business? And I view a lot of these things as more like actors on a stage. And what you got to be mindful of is not just the actor, but the interaction between actors. Right. And so it's not just one of these things. It's the interaction of maritime freight stresses with domestic stresses. And it's that interaction between the two that gets magnified. And so it's not the sum of the individuals, but there is absolutely an escalating component between the two. And then you get the lack of import options that come because the freight costs are going up. And then the one that probably no one really saw or paid attention to were cyber attacks. Right. We all know the story of Paper Excellence. We all know the story of Westrock, right? You may not have heard some of the stories about other mills that were attacked. There was a mill that was attacked as late as July, the 4th of July holiday, right? And luckily they were able to catch it in time. but these are real. These are absolutely real differences. Okay. So the issues of 21 have greater depth. They were years in the making, and they're not easily resolved. It's not just like, well, when pulp comes back in, everything's going to be hunky dory. What I'd ask you to consider is in those 2021 impacts, I don't even list pulp as an issue because pulp's going to do what pulp's going to do. And right now, pulp is actually coming back. So pulp prices shot up like everything else. They are starting to stabilize and start to come back down. I honestly, the reality is that most of the suppliers that are left in North America have some level of integration where they're not so reliant on purchased pulp as they were in 2018. And the reality is, don't expect another 2018 recovery. All these elements that I just talked about were not in play in 2018. And the solutions to these issues are not simplistic. They are not just wait, 6 months and they will correct themselves. Some of these are fundamental tectonic shifts that have occurred. And so I want to, start there and just make sure that we level set everybody that the challenges we face are very different, than we have in the past. All right. So we said we'd talk about COVID because you can't have a conversation today with anybody about anything if you don't talk about COVID. The reality is the Delta variant is obviously driving an increase in the number of daily caseloads. And so you kind of see that here. That's what this red line is. It's the rise in the daily reported cases, right? And then I've got charted here is the orange line is the deaths per 100,000. So, we all know that caseloads are going up. I guess the one positive that I at least take out of this is the rate of change of deaths is not what the caseload is seeing. And so, hopefully that's positive, and maybe that points to, do vaccinations matter? I don't know. And I'm not here to get into a political debate of, vaxxer or anti-vaxxer. I'm just presenting you the data and let you make the decisions. This is the number that gets thrown around a lot, that, only 51% of the population has been vaccinated, when in reality, really what you need to look at is this one right here, the 60%, because, there is supposedly no qualified vaccine for anybody under 12. So why even talk about the total population when it's not even in play? So it's 60% of the population under the age of, or over the age of 12 is vaccinated. But more importantly, 81% of those folks that I would consider, based on what we know, to be most at risk. So 81% of the population is vaccinated over the age of 65. So I think that's a good thing. But the reality is COVID is a wild card. And so everything I share from here on out is absolutely a wild card, depending on what COVID will do or doesn't do, right? It's the brutal reality. Everything we say about the future state is predicated on the current known state of COVID, kind of continuing, if you will. Okay. So let's talk about inflation. It's front and center of everyone's mind. And honestly, I wish we were doing this conversation about a week later, because those of you that follow federal monetary policy know that the Fed is meeting virtually in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. I don't know how you do that virtually from Jackson Hole, Wyoming, unless they have a picture of what Jackson Hole looks like, or they're all, bunked up in the hotel and they're all sharing a view. I don't know. But I would love to get their perspective of, where they see current inflation, because, the reality is, at least what we all feel as business owners and operators, as well as consumers, we are feeling inflation. This is what inflation feels like, right? They are real. Right now, the June number, which was the last one that I saw that came out, this is from the Wall Street Journal, so that June's inflation was 5.4%, taking out energy, right? And so, and I look over here on the producer price index, that's the number that suppliers and industrial purchasing agents, that's what they feel. It's 5.5, right? And so the reality is, is it transitory or is it real? I don't know. But right now it feels a whole lot like it's a lot stickier than what most folks may be giving it credit to. Okay. The other thing I would tell you is we all need to be mindful of what's going on in Washington, D.C. right now. There's the $1 trillion infrastructure bill, and there's the $3.5 million budget bill. Keep in mind, folks, nothing ever comes from the government. No funds ever flow from the government if there isn't a piece of red tape, a piece of bureaucracy attached to it. That's just the way it works. If you want the money, here's what you got to sign up for. And generally what happens is, by that level of red tape, if you will, creates cost pressures, because now someone just can't, willy-nilly spend. They've got to comply with something, which means they've got a reporting requirement, or they've got an obligation to do something different over and above what they would have normally done, which ultimately drives up costs. It's a fact, right? If you don't believe me, look up the economist Milton Friedman, and talks about government spending doesn't stimulate anything but government. And so that's a perspective that we all need to be mindful of. Okay, so if you're thinking of that, our saving grace is coming from Washington, you may want to rethink that. Okay, and it's translating into paper making costs. Here's the reality: that all the input costs have risen dramatically. Now there is some relief in sight. I talked about pulp, right? So here's the pulp forecast, right? So NBSK, Northern Bleached Softwood Kraft. This is the stuff that makes paper bags stand up and be stiff, and it's the stuff that gets put in envelopes to make them so that they can take a perf and a punch and apply a window, and it makes copy paper run through the copy machine without jamming, right? Every producer of printing papers generally has some degree of softwood fiber in it. It's expected to taper off, right? Corn, and again, these slides are actually courtesy of the folks at Pixel, so thank you. And I know I have listed the source for all the data that you see on every slide, because again, this is about us as an industry. We're not making money on these presentations. We're trying to hopefully arm and equip our supply chain partners, both customers, clients, and our supply base, to make better decisions about the future state of our combined supply chains. You're going to see that corn looks like it's going down. I would argue that if you've read anything over the last 30 days about the droughts in the Midwest, that corn and wheat will likely go up just due to the lack of harvest. And so that's just one of those ones, again, where you get conflicting data points, right? And why do corn and wheat matter? And when you're talking about paper making, we're not making cornflakes here, Greg. We're making paper. The reality is that corn and wheat have starch in them. That starch is a viable, is one of the leading ingredients in sizing that basically seals up a sheet of paper. And it's the difference between toilet tissue and printing papers, is the sizing that's on that sheet that holds out the ink and makes it water resistant. It also goes into a lot of the coatings. So corn is a big contributor to paper making costs. And then, butadiene, this is one in digital papers. Right, so a lot of any digital printing that you do is courtesy of probably butadiene being in the fine paper coatings in that sheet that help hold out the ink and make the image pop. Okay, so let's switch gears and let's talk about employment or unemployment. Right now, very much like what we experienced I'll call it the last 12 months of the middle of 2019 all the way up to the beginning of 2020. There are more job openings. There are 10.1 million job openings, and there's only 8.7 million unemployed, right? And before you jump to the conclusion that, oh man, we just need to, people just need to go to work, keep in mind that the states have started to curtail some of the supplemental unemployment benefits that I know we're creating conflicts. The jobless claims right now are, we're still not at the 2019 levels of 218,000. We're at 348 at last time I looked. The reality is, there's been a demographic shift that we all have to be mindful of. And as business owners and operators, you need to be aware of. And you don't hear a lot of people talking about this. And this is the idea that the demographics of the US population are such that you got to be mindful of this, right? So this is the number of babies born in the United States going back to 1940 and going up to basically the year 2000. And you can obviously see this spike, right? And so these are the baby boomers. They're all getting ready to retire. And the reality is there is just not enough people coming up in the next set of generations to fill the gap that the baby boomers will leave behind. So it is fool's gold to be, it's a folly to think that you are, all the jobs that existed 5 years ago will exist in the future. There's just not enough people, in the US to make that happen. Therefore, we have to rely on some level of immigration. That's a fact. We have since really the late 60s. Okay. We've had to rely on some level of immigration. But more importantly, something for you to consider is, how are you prepared to handle it in your business? If you are going to struggle with entry-level jobs, what level of automation are you seeking and looking at? In Europe, they already feel this, right? They absolutely already feel this just based on the lack of, the generations. And so they're putting in all kinds of automation in a variety of manners, whether that's, going into a restaurant, whether that's self-service, whatever. You're seeing this in mass in Europe. So when you go to Walmart and think, Walmart's a heartless, caring, folks from Arkansas, consider the fact that there's just not enough cashiers in the population to take your money, right? And so we all need to be thinking about this differently. And please don't take my word for it. If you're skeptical at all, go do the research, and I'd love to hear from you, your perspective. But as for us at Millcraft, this is what we know is coming. And this is why we're trying to make some of the moves that we've made, just because we know that labor scarcity is real. So images like this, closed due to lack of employees, it's real. Now, I don't know that it's ever gotten this bad where you have to be, we're now hiring fried turkeys. I'm not saying you have to go to that level to, fill your employment gap, but it is absolutely real, and it will be with us for a while. And really what that does then is it drives wage pressures. Right. And so you're starting to see wage pressures really start to hit the private sector. Okay. So right now it's getting close to 6% wage pressures. I tell you, it's a lot more than that, just because this is a trailing indicator. There were a lot of wages that have risen here in the last 3 months. And the reality is, if you're trying to attract an employee, that's wonderful. Keeping them may be an altogether difficult challenge. And the reality is, again, going back to that slide before, where there are 10.1 million job openings, but there's only 8.7 unemployed. The reality is, if you're hiring somebody, chances are you're hiring someone else's employee. And all you're doing is going to create this giant bidding war, and wages are going to go up as a result. There was a great article, just ask you to read on your own, and you can find it, about Cowan Transport. So if you're going down the road, Cowan Transport, COWAN Transport, white trucks, black lettering. They are actually offering a $20,000 signing bonus for new drivers coming on board. $20,000, $15,000 paid out in the first 6 months. The balance paid in the next 6 months. So it's not like you got to wait forever to get those signing dollars. That's just the table stakes that's going on in that segment right now. Again, think about, what does that mean for you and your business if it came to, press operators or folks in the warehouse or your local delivery drivers. It could be really problematic. Yeah, there we go. And so speaking about the transportation industry, let's talk about freight real fast. Okay, so we talked about this the last time. What's going on in the domestic freight industry? It's a lack of drivers, right? Goes back to the population, back to that demographic we talked about. COVID shut down a lot of driving schools. So the reality is, there wasn't the capability to train drivers, and you can't do drive-alongs when everything is basically shut down. And so we basically lost a year's worth of new drivers coming into the industry. Keep in mind that Driver Clearinghouse, you heard us talk about this in May, took out about 60,000 drivers. It's a good thing. Those folks are off the road. These are the folks that have historically gone from job to job to job. And every time they were involved in an incident in some way, shape, or form, and alcohol or drugs were identified in their system, they basically quit that employer. They went down the street, and their record never followed them. Now, with the Driver Clearinghouse, their record absolutely does follow them. And so there's a requirement on employers. If you employ CDL drivers, you have to report everything to this clearinghouse, if you will. And so again, it's a good thing long term. Short term, it creates stressors in an already stressed out segment of our industry. And then demand increase. The reality is, industrial production is up 7% just in the month of July. So there's a lot more stuff moving. And the reality is there's 60,000 drivers that are off the road, and actually in total there's 200,000 drivers short, just based on all the number of folks that have retired or may have left the industry and decided not to come back. And then delayed new equipment. So if you and I decide, hey, let's go start our own independent trucking company and we'll go hire some drivers. Right now, if you place that order with a major producer, Peterbilt, Kenworth, whatever, the reality is you're probably going to wait a year and a half to get that tractor. And in fact, on the trailer side, they're not even going to quote you a date in terms of when you could get that trailer. That's just the brutal reality. I know as part of Millcraft, we're just now receiving tractors that we placed a year ago, and so it's just one of those dynamics that absolutely sets out there, and so here's what kind of the summation of the impacts. You're seeing dry van rates, and so that's what this is. That's what a dry van rate is. So if you hear people talk about dry van, that's what it means. There's no refrigerator unit, which is a little device that sets up here, and it's not a flatbed, which ones that you see with tarps. So this is a dry van. This is the majority of everything that you and I ship. We either ship to you or you ship out to your customers is riding in a dry van. The reality is we're almost record level in terms of spot rates. We're over 276 a mile was the last number that was reported. And then it creates this because there's this out of balance. Right now, there are 6.4 loads for every tractor trailer that's available. They give you context. What does that mean? That means if I'm a tractor trailer, and I've got an operator and I'm sitting in Omaha, Nebraska, and I call my dispatcher, he's going to give me the option of 6 different loads that I can haul, right? That is the reality. That means 5 other loads probably may not get, the probability is they may not get filled. And so what you're seeing is the reject rate, which is what this slide right here, this little graph right here shows, is that about 24%, almost 25% of all the loads go unfilled for the day. In other words, 25%, one out of every 4 orders that come in, loads tendered, don't get picked up today. So that just falls over to tomorrow. Guess what? 25% tomorrow just keeps cascading. Okay. And so we see this as part of Millcraft. We see this in terms of, the loads are delayed maybe a day, maybe 2 days, maybe 3 days, maybe a week in some instances right now. And so this DHL supply chain pricing power index is clearly in the carrier's court, right? Rarely will you see it much higher than that. And that's just the reality of, expect freight rates to be elevated for quite some time. There is nothing coming to the rescue that will solve the domestic freight situation. Let's shift gears and let's talk about global freight, right? I know the last time we talked in May, we talked about the Port of Los Angeles. And so I know a lot of you, love the charts and graphs we were able to show. This is what the Port of Los Angeles looks like as of this morning. And if you can count those are the vessel names that are out there. There are 43 vessels at anchor in the Port of Long Beach waiting to come in. That is a new record, ladies and gentlemen. That's the most that's ever been anchored waiting to come in. And so all these actors that we talked about, whether it's container availability, the port closure on the outbound side, vessel sailings and being delayed, COVID impacting operations in a warehouse, which create port congestions on the receiving end, and then outbound train availability, because a lot of this stock that's received in Long Beach has got to ride piggyback to basically Chicago, because 65% of the U.S. population is within a 2 days drive of Chicago, so it's got to get that freight there, right? The London-based Drury Shipping World Container Index right now shows going from the major east-west artery, so that would be like a Ningbo or a Shanghai, into Long Beach, just hit $9,000, $9,600 the week of August 19th. That's up 360% from a year ago. Keep in mind, we're not even in peak season. It's just now August through October is when chaos ensues because of the heavy retail demand. And so let's just do the math. Let's stop there for a minute. Containers used to cost about $2,000, right? So at $2,000, that equates to $3.94 a hundredweight in paper pricing. Okay, simple math. That's what the norm used to be, kind of I'll call it pre-2018. It's gone up as high as $3,000 a container, $592, and it kind of ebbs and flows between the two. But when you talk $9,600 a container, that's $18.93 a hundredweight. That's a material cost impact to your supply chain and my supply chain. So the math is real, and unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's going to get any better anytime soon. In fact, Gene Soroka, and you can search this yourself on the internet, right? So this is the executive director of the Port of Los Angeles. Sum it up this way: warehouses are overflowing, rail yards and carriages are maxed out. Chassis and containers are going to be hard to come by. Ships are coming and waiting at anchor to get worked. Factories are behind in orders, even though output is at record levels. And his last comment is, what we're trying to do is squeeze 10 lanes of freeway traffic down to 5. That's the reality in the global, maritime freight industry. And so when you think about imports coming to the rescue of our industry, you got to keep this in mind. It's going to be a while before they're able to show up, just because there's a lot of other things that has a whole lot higher values that's able to bump, items off. And in fact, I've heard stories of, a container being a producer in Europe having booked freight and knowing they had a sale date and believing their cargo was going to get put on a ship, only to have their shipment bounced because somebody was willing to pay more. Okay, that is a reality. There are no guarantees. Just because you get a sailing date quoted, that there's no guarantees you're going to make the ship, because everybody right now is trying to maximize what's on the water. For those of you that follow the global freight industry, Maersk just announced their first quarter earnings. They were 10 times their 2020 annual earnings. In one quarter, they earned 10 times more than they did in the entire calendar year of 2020. That's the kind of the impact these situations are having. And so let's talk about the confluence of the actors here. So you have the COVID actor coming in against the supply chain challenges in the maritime. Those of you may not know this, but the Chinese port of Ningbo has been shut down for 2 weeks. It just literally came up yesterday due to a recent COVID outbreak. They had, COVID, it was one case of COVID. It, blossomed into several. They shut the port down. 25% of China's volume goes through this port, and it's the third largest port in the world. So again, everything we talk about here has got to be taken with a grain of salt, with that backdrop of COVID can change everything. It absolutely can. This is what the port of Ningbo looks like. These are all containers waiting to come in to just get loaded. And so where do I come up with all these charts and graphs? These aren't just my kids' architectural drawings. You can get this for yourself. So if you go to maritimetraffic.com/EN for English, type that into your browser, you're going to see every vessel in the world that's being tracked by local and international authorities. You can make it say, only show me transportation. You can see leisure ships. You can see whatever you want. You can watch freight move. More importantly, you can see the name of those ships. You can see their destination and their heading. So if you know that your product is on a certain vessel that's leaving a port on this date, you can actually watch it, live. And believe me, in some industries, I was talking to a fellow National Association of Wholesale Distributor. They're in the electrical distribution world. They have a team that is doing nothing but tracking the vessels when they leave and just tracking them on the water, so they have a better ETA. That's kind of what everything has come to these days. Okay, so enough of the backdrop in terms of some of the things that are going on that are systemic. Let's talk about it's absolutely happening in the North American paper industry. So let's start with uncoated free sheet. So the last time we talked in May, I did not have 2021 data. This is 21 data. This actually represents a fairly significant change. That number was more like 7.2 in terms of supply. In other words, there were 7.2 million tons of capacity in North America. It's now 6.5 based on all the capacity that's come offline. If you extract exports, that gets you to about 6.3 million tons is what North American producers can produce. Keep in mind the demand based on the last 6 months annualized rate would say right now the industry can't keep up with itself. Domestic sources are not sufficient for what the North American demand is for uncoated free sheets. And so you see imports at 7.9. The difference between the two is inventory movement back and forth, right? So right now, for the first time in a very long time, North America absolutely depends on imports in uncoated free sheet. That was not the norm. It is absolutely the norm right now, right? And keep in mind there are 1.2 million fewer tons being produced right now domestically. How did we get there? These are all the mills that are closed. So 2 million tons out in the last 3 years. An additional 388 were just taken out in the first 6 months of 2021, right? That's about 26% of the previous uncoated free sheet capacity was taken out. So if you look at the fourth quarter of 2019, take out 26% of the capacity, that's where we're at today. We are all feeling this, and I will show you in here in a couple other slides. You're going to start to feel uncoated free sheet more than you're feeling coated free sheet because of some of the complexity that's going on, okay? So if you're not feeling it now, you will be feeling it here before the end of October. So this is this is where I get that data that would say what's the current demand. There's where you see it's kind of bouncing back, and here's where you're starting to see it. So it's year over year, April was 24% more demand, higher shipments than 2020, 28% in May and 20% in June. So we're running about 20% above demand in 2020 than we were in 2019, or excuse me, in 2020. And there's now 20% less year over year. So there's a 40% delta there. That's the reality. And certain segments of the uncoated free sheet market are feeling it worse than others. Namely, if you're needing cut size right now, first of all, if you don't have a cut size supply chain issue, consider yourself very blessed, because right now that market is extremely tight. The backlogs are incredible. We're in the middle of back to school season, so school bids are out. Cut size is very difficult to come by, and you're seeing cut size transact at record setting levels of pricing. The forms industry, it's up as well. I would tell you that those two are down in demand, not because the demand isn't there. It's just that we can't supply it. Those are the folks that are being, pushed to the kind of the back of the line, if you will. We talk about the margin stack. Those are the folks that are being moved to the back of the line. So let's look at the, I like to call it the dashboard. And again, this is a lot of great, useful data. So this slide right here talks about the net change of inventory month over month. So, in the month of June, for example, we pulled down 19,000 tons of inventory. In the month of May, we built 4,000 tons. So that's how you read this, right? So you can kind of see, there was an inventory build, right the last part of December, right? It's normal seasonal inventory demand. But what you're seeing is there's some big swings here, right? Uncoated free sheet marketplace inventory levels are at their lowest on record, right? So about 435,000 is what I estimate, 425 is what I estimated at. And again, some of it's hard to get because you're talking to all the different mills and trying to triangulate. We've pulled out 48,000 tons of inventory just in the last 6 months alone. So we are sucking the walls out of warehouses across the country. Right now, we're at less than 28 days inventory on hand. So this is an absolute number. This is a relative number. So even with all the demand being taken out, we're still, at a very low number, that 28 days. This is not sustainable, folks, right? This would say that inventories are insufficient for what we need to have operating in the months of September and October and the better part of November before things start from a demand start to cool off. And that equates to operating rates that are through the roof, right? So operating rates right now are above 92%. Uncoated is a little different, in my opinion. Uncoated mills generally have a little more complexity to them, just because a lot of them have colors, they have multiple finishes. The basis weight ranges are a little more dramatic. And so there's a lot more complexity, in my opinion, in uncoated free sheet mills than coated free sheet mills. So don't take offense to my coated free sheet folks that are out there. It's just my perspective, right? Knowing what's out there. So right now, year-to-date operating rates are at 94%. Basically, we are absolutely pulling down inventory. This is not sustainable, right? And so this would tell you, don't expect conditions to improve until 2022, sometime in 2022. And I don't want to spoil the ending here. I got a little more clarity coming up in a few slides, right? Because there's no real stockpile of inventory. There's nothing that's going to come bail us out in this space. Looking at coated, okay? So here are the numbers. These have not changed. These were 2021 numbers to begin with, based on all the announced closures that Verso had done at Luke and at Wisconsin Rapids. Again, North American supply is insufficient to satisfy demand. So again, going up here, you got 2.2 million tons of capacity. Demand is at 2.6. So net of exports, you're at 2 million. That's 78%. Right? So I need 22% imports just to be level. And if demand takes off, I'm going to need a whole lot more imports, because again, these guys are tapped out. They're running full out. So we need imports. The reality is those imports aren't coming, right? All because of the container situation. Now, some of them are, so I don't want to dissuade you at all. I was talking to some of our good friends in the Southwest, and their comments were they were receiving paper from Asian exports, but they were receiving different containers, and they had 8 different price points based on when they were ordered. And so they're getting slammed. Imagine trying to rationalize containers that you're receiving, and there's 8 different price points in those containers. So it's a little bit of chaos in some of these import supply chains right now. And again, it's all driven by a lot of this capacity that went offline. So the 2021 mill closures were absolutely dramatic. These were second quartile assets that were taken out in a lot of cases. The Oulu, Finland mill that is not even on here because it's a global item. That was over like 1.4 million tons all by itself. It represented something closer to 18% of the European capacity, all in that one closure. So globally, there's been a lot of capacity that's been shuttered. Okay. And again, why? It's either been shuttered or converted, I should say. And so again, why? Because again, capital dollars flow where they get treated best. And graphics papers does not make the returns that packaging does, or fluff pulp does, or tissue does, or insert grade here, right? Don't believe me? Go look at go look at SAPI's earnings, go look at UPM's earnings, and go look at the segments when they call it out. And they'll talk about graphics papers versus packaging papers. Go look at the return that those organizations get, those public organizations get. You can see it for yourself. Okay. So what's going on with the demand of coated papers? Well, the reality is, we are picking back up, right? The economy is starting to come back. Everyone's starting to feel it. Everybody needs to grow. But the reality is, the demand is strong. It's up 26% in the last 90 days, year over year, but we lack inventories. We pulled down 300,000 tons of inventory in the last year. We basically sucked the walls out of a mill, over the last year. The web market is extremely tight right now. If you're relying on web tons, about extremely tight allocations and moratoriums. And what we're starting to see and experience is we're seeing large sheet orders come through that are consuming mass quantities of sheets. And we know those are web orders that don't have funding, and they've now tipped over into sheets. And so we would expect that to continue for quite some time. Operating rates have skyrocketed. So when, we talked about, coated mills are probably not as complex, just because they're generally making the same shade. They're just going through a basis weight. And then you get, coating and super calendaring creates your finishes between satin, gloss, and dull. Those operating rates that you see at 115 that means dramatic inventory drawdowns, right? The coated industry absolutely has to depend on imports. And allocation's been in effect in some way, shape, or form since May, and moratoriums now you're starting to see. And the reality is that year-to-date operating rates are above 103%. So expect the coated market to be tight for some time until the imports can satisfy the gap. I know for a fact that, Verso is making some changes to the Quinnesec mill. One of the machines there is getting an improved head box, and then come next spring, if things go right by June, they should have the capacity to make about another 100,000 tons of paper on the same asset. Again, that's not confidential information. You can go look at it. It's on their earnings call. So again, there are folks that are trying to close the gap that's out there. If I look at the inventory changes, this is the slide that should worry you, right? This is where I'm talking about the 319,000 tons being pulled down, just month over month over month over month. December, we would normally, November, December, and a little bit of January, you expect inventories to be built. They weren't. They were pulled down dramatically, and we've never been able to catch back up, right? And so on an absolute basis, we are at all-time record lows of inventory, 11 months of drawdown. It's the lowest coated free sheet inventory in 30 years. This is not sustainable. We're, below 33 days of inventory on hand. Again, that's just not sustainable. So you're going to feel the effects. You are in the eye of the hurricane in both coated and uncoated marketplace. So Greg, doesn't this all hurt the future of print? If I can't get paper, doesn't this hurt the future of print? Here's what I'd tell you to take solace in, right? My opinion, digital marketing is turning into white noise right now. Print-based marketing still delivers a superior ROI, right? And more importantly, you're starting to see consumer behavior start to understand the value that print provides. Okay, so as I talked about in my opening, I'm fortunate enough to be a part of Two Sides and Keep Me Posted. And they're wonderful organizations. If you don't know anything about them, please contact me or go out to their website, twosidesna.org, or keep me posted, and we'll get you set up. Again, you need to know these folks are fighting for you and the value of print, and making sure that people aren't greenwashing facts to make an argument that's really not there, as well as making sure that people have the right to choose how they receive critical information. And so I just want to call your attention to there was a federal class action lawsuit that was just settled in the state of New York with Waste Management, where Waste Management was charging $6.50 a month for a paper statement fee. The lawsuit was brought, and Waste Management halted the practice even before the case was heard. Again, it's a wonderful good news story of making sure that we got to stem the tide of people just saying, I'm going to force you to pay for print. That's crazy, because the reality is that consumers are concerned about marketing otherwise, right? Because 73% of U.S. consumers believe they shouldn't be charged more for a paper statement or a bill. 86% of consumers believe they should have the right to choose how they get communicated to. I don't know about you, but my email inbox is full of junk and spam. And quite candidly, I'm scared to open probably 3/4 of my emails these days just because of cyber attacks, right? Something shows up in my inbox or my mailbox, I know, what's the worst it could be, right? And then if you go look at 74% of consumers are concerned that their personal information, held electronically, is at risk of being hacked. That's when we talk about cybersecurity. We were just having this conversation internally the other day with a couple of folks that this is real, this is genuine. And so I believe you're going to start to see a pivot back to folks depending on and needing print. Again, print matters. There's still something. I know we got Daniel Desjardins on the phone, and haptics. That stuff does matter, right? So let's talk about the forecast 2022 quickly, because I know we're a little bit over, or getting ready to be over. So I would expect coated free sheet pricing on the website. I would expect another round of increases. Keep in mind, in January, when we first started talking about this, we talked about there would be 4 price increases in the coated marketplace. We were absolutely wrong. There's been 5, right? That's the reality. I do believe there's one more headed for coated web, and that's just because of the scarcity of that grade. And again, part of it is based on the profitability that mills have between making web and making sheets. Other than that, on the uncoated side, there is a concern between a lot of the folks in the industry. They don't want to have another round of price increases, because what they don't want to do is embolden a lot of imports and kind of get too far ahead of themselves. So I think you're going to see uncoated free sheet pricing stabilize. You may see a little volatility in cut size, just because it is absolutely a little stressed out right now, and maybe even some of the form side, just because of the lack of supply. But they're not going to go too far past the fall of not like the fall of 2018. So let's talk about, when do you see in the return to normal? This is not just my perspective. I reached out to a variety of our suppliers, and actually I reached out to a handful of our cooperators, other distributors, and other merchants. So if you look at the input costs, right, raw materials, they should stabilize by the third quarter. Domestic shipping is not going to level off until late Q2 of next year. Drivers, e-commerce, imported goods. Maritime is never going to go see $2,000 containers again. It's going to be more like $3,000 and $4,000, and that's a $2 to $4 a hundredweight impact. So my belief is it's no sooner than Q2 of 22. So it's going to be more of the same until Q2 of 22 at the earliest. Keep in mind, there are a lot of, I put it in there, exogenous shocks that could be out there. COVID could rear its head, or it could be resolved, right? And the economy could roar back. The infrastructure bill may pump a lot of dollars into the marketplace and create even more demand, up or down, right? But I want to talk about these exogenous shocks, not to scare you, but to give you the absolute perspective that the industry is balanced on a razor's edge. It truly is. And so any major shocks, one way or the other, can tip the industry dramatically. So those of you may not have ever heard of the Kennebec River Dam removal proposal, right? That's out there. And first of all, let me just say this. I doubt highly that this ever comes to life, but I want to use it as a point of reference to say, this is a shock that's not on any of our radars, that is absolutely, has some potential, even though it's extremely limited. So what do I mean? So Sappy's Somerset Mill feeds off of the Kennebec River, and there are a series of dams on that river that help, obviously, create pools of water that the mill flows in, pulls from, as well as, offloads its effluent out of. There are a tremendous number of, it's been for a number of years, probably decades, that environmental groups have been after these dams to be removed, because the dams block the Atlantic salmon's migration back into its mating waters, right? The reality is, there's almost no shred that this is ever going to come to pass, right? Senator Collins is not going to watch the single largest employer in the center of Maine, come under fire over something like this. There will be some accommodation that's made in the dams. But I bring this point up to say, this is something that's not on your radar. It's not on our radar. It's not on a lot of people's radar, but it's something that's out there that can shock the system out of left field. Those are the risks that you got to be mindful of. Again, why? Because the industry is balanced on that razor's edge. Okay. Again, it's not going to happen. But again, I just want to give you that shock factor of things that you're not even thinking about can absolutely come back. The last thing I'd ask you to consider is that, remember, 2022 is a midterm election year. You think you saw, spending in the presidential election. We ain't seen nothing yet. There are a lot of highly contested races. I think Herschel Walker just put in that he's running for Senate in the state of Georgia. There's going to be a lot of dollars following that race, where he's going up against the pastor Warnock, I think. And so you're going to see postal grades really start to tighten in July of next year. So you may get, as Q2 in 2022, maybe things start to slow down a little bit. We catch our breath, but then by July, caliper grades, postal grades are very likely to take off again, based on the midterm election. Okay. So a couple of things to help you think about your business and maybe bolster your supply chain, right? So I ask some of our key suppliers, what do you wish customers knew, right? In the spirit of transparency, what do you wish customers knew? First and foremost, I love this line. The allocation is a manual process managed by human beings. I know there is frustration. I know there's a lot of people that are like, oh my Lord, this mill can't get it right on allocation. The reality is there is nothing automated about an allocation model, right? It is all managed by best estimates of what the mill will produce versus best estimates of what people will consume. That's melded together in terms of here's what we think is going to happen. And there's humans on the front line that are subject to emotions that are having to deal and manage this on a day-to-day basis. So I thought it was a very valid comment that, again, I don't think a lot of people have a perspective on. One person said it's the year of the procurement department, right? Customers got to understand what makes a supply chain sustainable. Mills are acting, are disciplined right now. Printers must act differently. And the customer stack rank matters. Do you know where your business is with your suppliers? You need to know, because how you get treated is where you fit in on that stack. We talked about, allocation the last time. Again, just making sure that you understand that it is literally grade and paper machine specific. And sometimes you make decisions based on not necessarily the absolute profitability of an item on a paper machine, but the fact that it may be tied to another piece that is the most profitable thing on another machine. So you can't kill it because these two pieces of business are wedded together. And again, that's where it's sometimes difficult to manage, but it is absolutely a challenge that we all start to see right now. Okay. And that then you also have to keep in mind there are supply chain issues that we've seen time and time again, where we believe the mill is going to be capable of producing this. They have a supply chain issue, and so their schedule completely changes. And so, it may be, moved out of the way. So what best practices have you seen? I thought this was interesting, right? Forecasting. You're going to hear me say the word forecasting at least a dozen times here as we close out. Provide a quarterly forecast. I get it. This industry is about demand that we may not know, but hopefully jobs that you're quoting on. And again, communication early and often, both good and bad, is better than waiting till the last minute and dropping what you think is a wonderful large order on a supply chain. Right now, that's the worst thing that you can do, right? The other thing is, I love this comment. This was actually from a distribution person. Have a PO ready to place when you got the inquiry. In fact, give me your good, better, best choices, right? So that I don't have to call you back, because when I find inventory, I need to be able to secure it now. And so, again, just keys to success in terms of what best practices have you seen. I thought that was very interesting. And that right now, partnerships matter, both on the merchant side as well as the mill side. Okay. And so talking about the value of a merchant, we talked about this last time. A merchant provides you that local inventory, that buffer. And I'll show you how at Millcraft we're trying to buffer that. It's the Sherpa effect. You tell me what you need and I'll find it for you. I will absolutely source it for you. I will help you get from point A to point B. And if you don't think I'm being accurate here, in the last couple of months, obviously everyone's struggled to get inventory. I had a very large publishing company that deals direct with mills reach out to us in frustration saying, I can't find something like this. Can you help us find it? Within 72 hours, we had a source, we had what they needed. It may not have been at the price point they needed, but we absolutely had stock ready to secure. That's a value of a merchant. If you're buying direct, you may be able to have one relationship with one mill because, again, you got to be able to consolidate your spend so you're important to somebody. When you do that with a merchant, you're important to the merchant. The more merchant can leverage your spend with other people's spend and really make a difference. And that we're actually looking at sustainability. We're asking questions about environmental sustainability, energy sustainability, logistics sustainability. And what does that mean for you? At the end of the day, it all means, improve working capital, sales growth, because you can be efficient and I had one customer tell us, they take orders because they know we can deliver and they know the other guys are padding their days because they're concerned about the other merchants or the other supply chains' ability to win. Quite candidly, we improve the robustness of your supply chain. And a lot of times merchant partnerships can be your greatest competitive advantage. Specifically, what's Millcraft doing? We bumped up inventory 35% in the last 180 days. No, we have not, ran up inventory and hurt our customers or excuse me, hurt the industry in terms of making this giant bubble. We are protecting our customers, but also more importantly, we're probably protecting our suppliers as well. Okay. We have over 350 guaranteed in-stock items. We have this thing called the $100 in-stock guarantee. It's still going on as we speak, right? Well, we're so confident. It's our target and A items. There are 350 of those things. They're in stock, and if they're not in stock, we'll give you $100. I don't care if the order is for $85. You get a $100 credit. Okay. We talk about, we order mill direct and we bypass the RDC just because we're buying in bulk, because we're buying for so many folks. Nighthawk. What is Nighthawk? It's our ability to move inventory around where it's needed. So $1 invested for one is $1 invested for all. And my opinion, I know I'm biased, but I'm not doing my job if I'm not selling the organization that I'm extremely proud to be a part of. Millcraft can absolutely be your greatest competitive advantage. So what do you need to focus on? I'm going to go back to the beginning, right? Talk about the weather channel and the 10-day forecast, kind of a 12-month forecast for success. You need to alter your thinking about buying via transactions and start to think about strategic sourcing. You need to partner with supply chain participants. The future belongs to those who have the best supply chains. Communicate early, often, and in depth. Tell them what you need, not what you want. Tell them what you absolutely need, not what you want, because everyone wants everything at any given price at the lowest number, right? Tell us what you need. That's what makes things happen. Forecast out as far as you can. 12 months is possible. The reality is those customers that have been able to forecast, I get as hard as it is, but those customers that have been able to forecast have been protected the best because they are a stable source of demand for our supply chain partners. And they can go to the bank knowing that, those tons are going to be there, right? Consistent, dependable volume is more meaningful to suppliers than sporadic one-time slugs that occur without no forecast. Consider how your business can handle the lack of available workers. What can you do to shore up your operations, knowing that there's a huge gap just in the demographics of the U.S. population? What does that mean in terms of, I may not get my jobs filled? Alter what you're thinking is what constitutes sustainability. We all think about sustainability, and the first thing we think about is FSC, SFI, or we may think about energy sustainability, or pulp and raw material costing, right? We've talked about that here recently, or freight, right? Where does that supply chain? What's the cost to move product around? What's that last mile of delivery, or total cost to serve, if you will? I'd ask you to consider cybersecurity. What does your cybersecurity plan look like? What is that of your supply chain partners? What does that look like? It's real and meaningful right now, folks, because it has the ability to bring people to their knees. If you don't believe me, go research businesses that have been shuttered because of cybersecurity issues. All right. Summary: market's going to be tight through Q2 of 22. Expect another round of web price increases, my opinion. I think uncoated will stabilize, other than potentially forms and cut size, just because of those unique conditions. There are inherent risks that are out there that could alter everything I've said, right? Whether that's COVID, whether that's stimulus, dollars actually flowing, all that. Freight remains a huge cost driver, both domestic and imported. And my personal biased opinion, strategic partnerships absolutely are invaluable. You leverage your spend, you protect against volatility, and you enable your business to respond as business reemerges. In my mind, there's no one better positioned to do that for you all than Ms. Millcraft. All right. That's what I got for today. Hopefully, I was able to give you a couple of nuggets of interest and maybe help you think about your business differently.